discussion video for our ACC 111 Financial Accounting and Reporting. This is for weeks 6 and 7, specifically for ULOa. For this particular lesson, our unit learning outcomes is to prepare adjusting entries. So these two other unit learning outcomes are included in weeks 6 and 7, but we have decided to just defer this in your fourth exam. So for our third exam, the coverage should only be ULOa, which is preparing the adjusting entries. So ito lang muna because this particular lesson is somewhat lengthy. So that i-refer na lang muna natin yung ibang topic sa next na exam, which will be the fourth exam. Okay. So since we will be discussing about adjusting entries, before we go to the main topic, discussing the different types of adjustments, so let us first discuss concepts which are relevant in the discussion of adjusting entries. So first, we have to understand these two accounting methods of recording transactions. So one is accrual basis and the other one is cash basis. So when we say accrual basis, the effect of the transactions and other events are recognized when they occur and not as the cash is received or paid. So this is one particular method of accounting which is very widely used, and even the accounting standards will tell us, requires us to record transactions using the accrual basis. So in this particular method, the income or revenue is recognized when earned, regardless of when it is received, and the expenses are recognized when incurred, regardless of when it is paid. So this actually, accrual basis is an application of the two recognition principles that we had in the previous topics. So first is the revenue recognition principle, and the second one is the expense recognition principle. So accrual basis is aligned to the revenue recognition principle and the expense recognition principle. Wherein, pag revenue yan, you will only recognize it as revenue or income kapag na-earn mo na. So we will only earn revenue or income when you have already delivered the goods or rendered the service. Whereas, for expenses, we will only recognize them when they are already incurred. So, pag sinabi natin incurred, it means that nagamit na natin, na-expire na, naka-benefit ka na. So, you have already consumed or used up such items, so that you have to recognize already as expense. So, take note, regardless kung kahit hindi mo pa siya na bayaran. So, that is accrual basis. The other concept or accounting method is yung cash basis. So in this concept of recognizing, this is the concept of recognizing the transaction at the time when the cash is received and paid. So you are more concerned of the timings of cash na. So if you have received cash, even if you did not yet earn it because you have not yet rendered the service, under the cash basis, you have to recognize it already as income. So, as mentioned here, revenues are recognized when cash is received, regardless of when it is earned, and expenses are recognized when paid, regardless of when it is incurred. So, again, dito sa cash basis, yung pinaka-basis mo of recording or recognizing income and expense, no, magdedepende siya kung kailan mo na-recognize or kailan mo na-receive yung cash or na-outlay, no, or na-disbursed yung cash. So, cash basis is applicable for tax, no, purposes. Kasi for tax purposes, we are more after of the capacity to pay, no, of the taxpayers. That is why kung kailan ang pag-receive ng cash, doon din i-recognize as income, no, yung ating revenue under the cash basis. But that is in contrast, no, kabaliktaran doon sa accrual basis. Kasi sa accrual basis, of which, no, ito yung ginagamit natin talaga sa accounting, na pwede kang makarecognize ng income kahit na hindi mo pa na-collecta for as long as you have already earned it. So, at the same manner, no, pwede ka na mag-recognize ng expense kahit hindi mo pa siya nabayaran for as long as you have already incurred such expense. So, that is accrual basis. So, we have here an example, no, just to illustrate the accrual basis and the cash basis of accounting. So, we have here Jose del Mundo paid, no, Magnagar Waters Beach Resort 9,000 pesos on January 9, 2020 for a one-day accommodation on January 16, 2020. Okay. So, under accrual basis, the revenue, no, Magnaga Waters will already recognize the accommodation, no, revenue only on January 16. Kasi nga, it is the time when Jose del Mundo will be availing, no, of the accommodation or availing of the services of Magnaga Waters Beach Resort. So, that's the time when Magnaga can really say that they have already earned, no, the revenue. So, under accrual basis, that is the time, no? January 16 is the day when to recognize the revenue. However, under the cash basis, no, since Magnaga Waters already collected 9,000 on January 9, then under the cash basis, the revenue, no, is recognized on that day, so January 9, 2020. So, that is cash basis. So, kung kailan mo na-receive yung cash, doon natin siya i-recognize as income. Another concept which is important in the topic, no, of adjusting entries is itong periodicity concept. So, if you can still recall, this periodicity concept, no, is the way to know, no, the success of the business, no, has operated is to close the door, sell its assets, pay its liabilities, and return any excess cash to the owners. So, this is known as liquidation. So, that process of winding up, no, the business is called liquidation. So, take note that it will be very impractical, no, that we will only measure the performance of the business kapag about to close na siya or magko-close na siya. Kasi it doesn't make sense. No? So, you want to know what is the performance of the business from time to time so that you can also do something, no, in the operations of the business. So, that is why we have this concept of periodicity. So, in this particular concept, no, the indefinite life of the business are subdivided into equal economic artificial business time periods known as accounting period. That is to provide timely information for decision-making purposes. The most basic accounting period is 1 year. That is either fiscal calendar year, or natural business year. So reports are also prepared in less than 1 year. So this is known as interim period na report. So for example, monthly or quarterly, so depending on the needs of the entity. So why is this periodicity important in adjusting entry? Because we have to know kung kailan ba yung cut-off. Kailan yung cut-off date. Hanggang saan lang pwedeng mag-recognize sa isang accounting period. So, periodicity concept will give us the idea na kailan ba yung cut-off period. Kung magre-record ako ng mga transactions, hanggang kailan lang. So, for example, if you are following the calendar year, so ibig sabihin, transactions na within pa December 31, then you have to recognize that, include that in your report for the month of December, or for that particular accounting period, so that transactions from January 1 and the rest of the next year, we will not be including them anymore in our reports kasi nga nag-cut off na noong December 31. So that's periodicity concept. And again, that concept is very important. That you have to understand it. It's very important and relevant kapag nagde-discuss tayo regarding adjusting entries. Okay. So next concepts will be recognition and derecognition. So this is also important. So pag sinabi nating recognition, it is the process of capturing for inclusion in the statement of financial position or performance an item that meets the definition of an asset, liability, equity, income, or expense. So the amount recognized in the reports is known as carrying amount. So pag sinabing recognition, so meaning this will tell us kung kailan mo dapat i-include, kailan mo dapat i-record ang isang item, whether that is an asset, that's a liability, equity, income, or expense. So, pag sinabi in accounting na recognize, ibig sabihin you have to record it. You include it in your records, you include it in your reports. So, that's recognition. On the other hand, pag sinabi natin derecognition, so that is the removal of all or part of a recognized asset or liability from the financial report of the company. So, ibig sabihin, pag derecognize or derecognition naman, ibig sabihin nun, tatanggalin na from the records. So, for example, if you sell or if you sold your equipment, then you have to derecognize it from your records. Kasi nga, binenta mo na. So, hindi na sa iyo or hindi na ikaw ang nagmamay-ari nun. So, you have to derecognize it, tanggalin na, remove it from your records. So, this is, again, these concepts are important, recognition and derecognition, in the concept of adjusting entries. So, later, we will know because in your adjusting entry, there are those items that you have to recognize and there are also those items that you have to derecognize. So, included yun in the adjusting entries na concept. Okay. Now, why is it that there's a need for adjustment? So, bakit ba mag-a-adjust? Bakit ba may adjusting entries pa? So, the adjustments are made by accountant or accountants to reflect the information from the entity that had occurred but not have been recorded. So, example nito, for example lang, yung billing ng kuryente na natanggap mo for the month. So, if you have not paid for that, so most probably, hindi mo siya ni-record. But, the periodicity concept will tell us that dapat that electricity or electric bill should be recorded in the period kung saan or kung kailan mo siya nagamit or na-consume. So therefore, you have to recognize liability for that particular transaction. So that's why, because adjustments are made because there are those information na nag-occur na pero hindi pa na-recognize or hindi pa na-record. So those should be recorded. Second, so these are done for revenues that must be recognized as it is earned during the period, and the expenses must be recognized as it is incurred during the period. So still related to the first na need na we need to prepare adjusting entries, yun na nga, para ma-record mo yung mga items na hindi pa na-record. Like, for example, yung revenue or yung expenses na na-incur mo na. This is also done to bring the balances of the accounts to correct one for the financial statements and to properly measure the entity's profit for the period. Kasi it is possible, it is possible that some items in your records were not yet updated. So what you have to do is you have to correct those balances. Dapat ma-reflect yung magkano ba talaga yung natitira, na how much is the asset or how much na is the expense part. So these entries will ensure the recognition and the recognition of the elements of financial statements. This involves changing the balance of the account at the end of the period from what is the current balances to what is the correct balance for proper reporting due to unrecorded events or transactions that occurred during the period. So without this entry, the financial statements or FS may not fairly show solvency and the profitability of the company. So that's the importance of adjusting entries. So why is there a need for adjusting entries? So because of this mga reasons. So the procedures are as follows. So when you do adjusting entries, when you do adjustments, so ito yung mga procedures na iyong ipa-follow. First is, the adjusting entries are journalized in the general journal. And then after journalizing them, they will be posted to the ledger. So after journalizing and posting the adjusting entries, the next thing to do is from the amount the amount from the balances in the ledger would be transferred to the report called the adjusted trial balance. So after posting your adjusting entries to the ledger, of course you will get your updated balances, and if you have already the updated balances, then you can already prepare this what you call adjusted trial balance. Adjusted trial balance because you'll be picking up amounts now which are already or which integrated already the adjustments that you have prepared. Okay, so let us now proceed to the types of adjustments. So there are two major types of adjustments. So one is deferrals, the other one is accrual. So under deferral, meron tayong three possible types or kinds of deferral. So one is prepayment. So this refers to mga prepaid expenses. Next is pre-collection, yung mga advance collection ng mga say for example, common nito yung pre-collection is advance payment by the customer to the entity. And then your depreciation. For the accruals, it could be accrued expense or accrued income or the accrual of uncollectible accounts. So these are the types of adjustments, and we will be discussing this one by one. Okay, so I'll start with deferrals. So ano ba yung deferrals? Deferrals is the postponement of recognition of an expenses that are already paid but not yet incurred, or a revenue that already collected but not yet earned. So, dalawa yan, no? Ang deferral could be the postponement of recognition of an expense. So, ibig sabihin, pag pinostpone yung pag-recognize ng expense, so, when you pay for it, no, instead of recognizing immediately expense, you just defer it muna. So, when you defer it, ibig sabihin na instead of recognizing expense, you'll be recognizing muna asset. Okay? Then second, these adjustments consider the amount that are already recorded in the balance sheet account. So, i-consider example, no, your prepaid rent. So, let's just have to check now. We have to check whether the prepaid rent ba that you have reported at the beginning of the period is still applicable. Is the amount would be relevant still, no? So, say for example, in your records, you have prepaid rent, which is good for a period of months. Now, after 1 month, of course, you wouldn't expect, no, or it would not be correct anymore to reflect, no, prepaid rent at the same amount because meron nang naglapse na isang buwan. So, ibig sabihin, for that particular item, no, or account, prepaid rent, merong portion doon sa prepaid rent na asset pa, na katong unexpired portion. But there's also a portion of it that is already considered as expense because of the passage of time, no, na-consume na ang isang buwan ng rent. Okay, the third is, no, the entry of this adjustment, no, the effect is it decreases the balance sheet account and increases the income statement account. So, that's the effect of a deferral. Okay. So, deferral adjusting entries are needed in the following situations. So, una, to reflect expenses incurred during the accounting period allocated from assets. So, yung example natin kanina na from prepaid rent, may portion dyan, no? After how many months? So, may portion dyan na nako-consume or na-consume mo na. So, therefore, there's a portion of your asset which will be transferred already to your expense. Second is to reflect revenues earned during the accounting period allocated from revenues received in advance. Ito naman, it has something to do with advance collection. So, here, no, it is possible that your liability, no, what you have recognized as a liability, merong ng portion doon na dapat i-report na as revenue. Kasi 'di ba sabi natin, revenue is earned kapag siya ay or revenue should be recognized kapag siya ay na-earn mo na. So, meaning, kapag nakarender ka na ng service or nakapag-deliver ka na ng goods, so, ibig sabihin, may portion na doon, no, na pwede mo nang i-recognize as revenue. Okay? So, dito tayo sa deferrals. Again, there are 3. So, pwedeng prepayment, pwedeng pre-collection, pwede ding depreciation. So, unahin natin yung prepayments. So, ano ba yung prepayments? So, prepayments are, of course, advance payments. So, these are advance payments, no? Wherein, no, expense is already paid, but it is not yet used, consumed, or it has not yet expired. So, examples of this are advance payment of rent, insurance, no? So, and the like, no? So, mga ganong klase, you have already paid for it, pero hindi mo pa siya na gamit. So, there are 2 methods of recording prepayment, no? So, actually, ito yung in-explain ko din sa inyo in our previous lesson, na there are 2 possible method of recording your prepaid expenses or prepayments. So, that could be asset method or expense method. So, ano ba yung kaibahan ng dalawa? So, pag sinabi nating asset method class, kaya ang tawag sa kanya asset method kasi your prepayment, no, yung prepaid expense mo, ay i-debit natin sa asset account. So, example, yung sa nagbayad ka ng advance for rent. So, dito, no, under asset method, your entry would be prepaid rent and credit cash. So, meaning, kaya siya tinawag na asset method kasi you will be debiting an asset account. So, in that particular example, prepaid rent. So, yung cash naman, of course, kasi prepayment siya, so ibig sabihin nagbayad ka. So, yung cash, constant na yan. No? Yung debit na lang ang yung i-identify kung anong klaseng asset ba yung binayaran mo. Okay? Now, pagdating ng adjusting entry, kapag asset method ang ginamit, pagdating ng asset adjusting entry, ito yung ating pro forma entry. So, magde-debit tayo ng expense, tapos magka-credit tayo ng asset. So, just take note that kapag asset method ang ginamit, no, sa original entry, pagdating ng adjusting entry, hahanapin natin yung expense part. Or, should I say, kasi expense man ito, so dapat hanapin natin or i-compute natin, i-determine natin kung magkano na lang ang expired portion or magkano na ang expired portion or yung nagamit na portion ng prepaid asset mo. Tapos, pag expense method naman, okay, so again, I made some corrections here. So, pag expense method naman, ganito yung sitwasyon, no? Nung original transaction, ang entry mo ay, instead of debiting asset account, nag-debit ka ng expense account. So, sa example natin, yung prepaid rent, no, na ni-record mo dun sa asset method, kapag expense method ang ginamit mo, ang i-debit mo ay rent expense. So, kaya expense method ang tawag kasi your debit is an expense account. Now, pagdating ng adjusting entry, kasi ang initial mo na record ay expense. Pagdating natin ng adjusting entry, ang hahanapin natin na yung asset portion or yung portion na hindi pa expired. Okay? So, kanina, pag asset method, ang hahanapin natin ay ang expense part or yung option o yung portion na expired na or nagamit mo na. Pero pag expense method, pagdating ng adjusting entry, ang hahanapin natin ay ang asset part or yung portion na hindi pa na-expire, na hindi pa na-consume, hindi pa na-gamit. So, punta tayo sa example. Okay. So, this is an example of a prepaid expense, specifically rent. Okay. So, we have here, the company paid 24,000 pesos rent in advance for the period of January, February, and March on January 2, 2020. So, nagbayad siya ng January 2, 2020. What would be the adjusting entry at January 31, 2020? Okay. Now, if you are using asset method, ganito yung ating entry. Okay? So, on January 2, the original transaction or the date of the transaction, kapag asset method ang ginamit, ang ating entry ay nag-debit tayo ng prepaid rent, which is an asset account, at 24,000 and credit tayo ng cash, which is 24,000. Okay? So, yun yung asset method. You're debiting your prepayment into an asset account. So, in this case, prepaid rent. Now, pagdating ng adjusting entry, take note, kasi asset method ito. So, pagdating natin ng adjusting entry, hanapin natin yung expired portion. So, how much of this 24,000 has already expired, no? Or na-consume na, no? Pagdating ng January 31, 2020. So if you're going to you're going to compute that 24,000 is good for 3 months. So pag multiply natin ng 1/3, so meaning 1 month over 3 months, then makakompute mo yung expired portion on a monthly basis. So isa lang man isang month lang man yung naglapse. So ibig sabihin yung 8,000 lang yung expired portion. So again, observe, kapag asset method ang ginamit, class, kapag maggawa ka na or mag-prepare ka na ng adjusting entry, ang hanapin nating amount ay yung expired portion. So yung portion na expense. Okay? So ang entry natin ay debit rent expense at 8,000, credit prepaid rent at 8,000. Okay? Now, kapag expense method naman ang ginamit, so ito yung pagkakaiba. So kasi expense method, ibig sabihin kapag expense method ang ginamit, during the transaction, yung original entry niya, nag-debit siya na ng rent expense, 24,000, and credit siya ng cash na 24,000. Now, pagdating ng adjusting entry, so since ang original natin na ni-recognize ang expense, pagdating natin ng adjusting entry, ang hanapin naman natin ay yung asset portion. So, in this case, your prepaid rent. So, asset portion naman. So, sabi natin, 24,000 is good for 3 months. So, ibig sabihin na pagdating ng January 31, 1 month already expired, whereas 2 months ay hindi pa expired. So, that is why dito sa computation natin, that's 24,000 times 2/3, or equivalent to 16,000. This represents the unexpired portion. So, take note, ito yung amount na i-recognize natin as our prepaid rent or asset. So, 16,000, and then we credit 16,000 for rent expense. Okay? So, that's the comparison between asset method and expense method. Now, let us compare the ending balances. So, here, this is actually for asset method, and then yung sa kabila ay yung expense method naman. Now, observe, dito sa asset method, di ba, una nating na-recognize yung prepaid rent. So, sa original entry natin, nag-debit tayo ng 24,000. Sa adjusting entry naman natin, nag-debit tayo ng rent expense na 8,000 and credit tayo ng prepaid rent. So, kung titingnan natin na prepaid rent, meron siyang balance na 16,000, which is good for 2 months. Whereas rent expense has a balance of 8,000, good for 1 month. So, yan yung sa asset method. Now, sa expense method, of course, nag-start tayo mag-recognize ng rent expense. So, here, nag-debit tayo ng 24,000 as rent expense. And then, pagdating natin ng adjusting entry, nag-debit tayo ng rent expense, nag-credit tayo ng nag-debit tayo ng prepaid rent, nag-credit tayo ng rent expense. So, ano nangyari? Ang rent expense mo na 24,000, reduced mo siya by 16,000. So, therefore, yung balance mo na lang na rent expense is 8,000. Whereas your prepaid rent is also 16,000. So, again, observe, whatever method that you will use, whether it is asset method or expense method, kung anong method pa yan, observe, that yung balance nila, yung ending balances nila are the same. So, example, sa asset method, prepaid rent niya, 16,000. Expense method, prepaid rent niya ay 16,000. Asset method, ang rent expense niya ay 8,000. Under the expense method, ang rent expense niya ay 8,000 din. So, this only goes to show that regardless of the method that you use, the ending balances would still be the same. So, no matter what or regardless of the method that you use. So, which method to use? Asset method ba or expense method? So, kapag silent yung problem, what we assume is gagamit tayo ng asset method, just like what you did in the previous mga journal entries. Unless otherwise stated na expense method, we will assume that we will use the asset method. So this is another prepaid expense or prepayment, specifically insurance. So in this particular problem, the company acquired a 1-year comprehensive insurance coverage for the service vehicle and paid $36,000 in January 2, 2020. So the manner of recording this transaction is similar to the recognition of rent. In-explain niya lang. So what would be the adjusting entry at January 31, 2020? Okay, so ganun din. So if this is your asset method, your expense method, so your asset method, ganito. So you record originally the transaction by debiting prepaid insurance, which is an asset account. So you debit it at 36,000. And of course, you credit cash at 36,000. Now, your adjusting entry, in your adjusting entry, since you have recognized an asset here, so yung hahanapin natin is yung expense portion or the expired portion. So if you've noticed, 36,000 is good for 1 year. So what the computation will show you that 36,000 times 1 or 1 month, that's from January 2 to January 31, divide 12 is good for 1 year, equals 3,000. So this is the expired portion of your prepaid insurance. So ang entry niya, debit insurance expense, credit prepaid insurance at 3,000. So, if you're using expense method, ganito naman yung iyong original entry. Nag-debit ka ng insurance expense, 36,000. Nag-credit ka ng cash, 36,000. And then yung adjusting entry mo, so nag-debit tayo ng prepaid insurance, your asset, 33,000. Credit insurance expense at 33,000. So, 33,000 represents the 11 months na hindi pa nag-expire. So, for this particular item, which is insurance. So, here is another comparison of the ending account balances, specifically for prepaid insurance. So, dito, if you are using asset method, on the left, if you're using asset method here, and on your right, nagamit siya ng expense method. So, ganun din, just like the prepaid rent. So, if you've noticed na the original entry, nag-debit tayo ng 36,000. So, nag-adjusting entry, nag-debit siya ng insurance expense, and mag-credit siya ng prepaid insurance na 3,000. So, that's under asset method. Under expense method, ganun din, when they originally record the transaction, nag-debit siya ng insurance expense and then nag-credit siya ng cash. So, with that, so nag-debit tayo ng 36,000 here. And then, ang adjusting entry, nag-debit tayo ng prepaid insurance and nag-credit tayo ng insurance expense na at 33,000. So, that amount, again, is equivalent to 11 months, which is still unexpired. So the next item is the still prepaid expense in the form of supplies. So in this particular illustration, the company purchased on January 1, 2020 a total of 35,000 worth of supplies for the year, and at January 31, 2020, the amount of 33,500 is still on hand and unused. So what would be the adjusting entry? Okay. Now, if you are using asset method, so ganito yung entry niya originally. No, so yung original entry niya noong January 1 when they purchased na the supplies, nag-debit siya ng supplies which is an asset account na 35,000 and credit cash na which is 35,000 also. Now, pagdating ng January 31, 2020, ito naman yung kanyang adjusting entry. So, take note, since we are using asset method here, so pag tayo ay nag-adjust, hanapin natin yung expired or used portion. So, diba sabi niya, 33,500 na lang nung natira. So, ibig sabihin na to get the consumed, no, or the used portion, what you have to do is you just deduct, no, 33,500 from 35,000 so that you will get 1,500. So, this 1,500 should be recognized as an expense, no, specifically supplies expense. So, that's 1,500. And then, magka-credit tayo ng asset which is supplies, no, 1,500. Now, under sa expense method, so since expense method ang ginamit, so your debit, no, when you record originally the transaction, is nag-debit ka ng supplies expense na 35,000, credit ka ng cash. Now, pagdating ng adjusting entry sa January 31, no, kung itong method ang ginamit mo, ito yung entry mo. Debit supplies, which is 33,500. So, take note hanapin mo ang unused or on hand, no? Yung meron pa yung company. And, fortunately, in this particular problem, binigay na sa atin, which is 33,500. And then, credit tayo ng supplies expense, no? Na 33,500. So, what will be the effect of these entries, no, and adjusting entries? So, this is the comparison of ending account balances, no, ng supplies. So, supplies is your asset account, no, under the asset method. Itong sa baba, ito yung supplies expense, also under asset method. So, kung titingnan natin, original entry natin sa supplies, meron tayong 35,000. Okay? And then, because of our adjusting entry, di ba nag-debit tayo ng supplies expense, credit, supplies. So, with that particular adjusting entry, ang balanse ng supplies natin ay 33,500, whereas our supplies expense is 1,500. So, that's for the asset method. Under the expense method, ito naman, meron tayong supplies expense na original na ni-recognize natin ay 35,000. Now, our entry, our adjusting entry, nag-debit tayo ng supplies na 33,500 which is equivalent to the unused or unconsumed, no, na supplies, and then credit ka ng supplies expense which is 33,500. So, again, take note that regardless of the method to use, no, whether it is asset method or expense method, your supplies would still be reported at 33,500, no, as you can see. Whereas your supplies expense are still debited, no, or are still reported at 1,500. So, under asset method, 1,500. Under expense method, still 1,500. Okay, so let's proceed now to depreciation. So, what about this depreciation? So, if you're familiar with property, plant, and equipment, you would know that part of it, no, they're actually deferrals, no, kasi when you purchase the non-current asset, you are deferring, no, you are still recognizing it as asset muna. So, ano ba itong depreciation na to? So, it is when, no, the portion of the cost of the long-lived assets that are used by the company in its operations are allocated based on the life of the assets and recognized portion used as expense. So, that portion, no, na ating i-report as expense, ang tawag doon ay depreciation. So the proper accounting for this type of transaction is to compute for the total cost of the asset, you get the salvage value, and estimate the life of the long-lived asset. So the third one is the allocated amount is known as depreciation or depreciation expense. So before we go further, now let us first define terms which are relevant to this particular lesson. So first is cost. Ano ba yung cost? So cost is the total amount paid to purchase or construct an asset. Okay? So after that, we have salvage value. Ano naman ito? It is the amount that can be recovered from selling the asset after the estimated life of the asset ends. So, ibig sabihin, pag fully depreciated na yung asset and, at what amount mo siya pwedeng mabenta? So, that is salvage value. So, other terms for that would be scrap value or residual value. So, same lang sila ng concept na amount that can be recovered from selling the asset. Next is the estimated useful life. This is the number of periods or the number of years that the entity can make use of the asset. So, estimated useful life will always depend on the entity. In actual practice, magdedepende yan sa policy ng company. So, may ibang company na nag-set talaga sila na, for example, if the amount is this much, then you have to depreciate it. The estimated useful life of that is 5 years perhaps, So, ang ban po, 3 years. So, depende lang siya sa policy po sa company. And, of course, it should be reasonable, Next is the depreciable amount. So, depreciable amount is the amount after deducting the salvage value from the cost of the long-lived assets or asset. So, depreciable amount is actually the cost minus your salvage value. So, that's depreciable amount. And then we have accumulated depreciation. So, accumulated depreciation is the summation of the allocated cost every period that are recognized as expense. So, ibig sabihin, every time meron kang depreciation expense, every year or every month, those amounts are added, to your accumulated depreciation. So, take note, this is a contra asset account, and they are deducted from the total cost to know the carrying amount or the book value of the property, plant, and equipment. So, let us now proceed to the computation of depreciation. So, paano ba kino-compute yung depreciation expense? So, let us use the basic, or the simplest method of computing your depreciation, which is the straight line method. So, when you reach your higher accounting, meron pang ibang methods of computing depreciation. But for the purpose of discussion, so we will be using straight line method lang muna. Okay? So, this is how you compute depreciation under the straight line method. So, first, of course, you'll have your cost. So, your cost minus your salvage value, residual value, or scrap value. So, i-deduct yan. So, after deducting your salvage value from the cost of your asset, you will get already your depreciable amount or cost, depreciable cost. Kulang ng T dito. Okay? So, if you have already the depreciable amount, then such amount will be divided by the useful life in years. So, i-divide mo siya by the useful or estimated useful life, so that you will get now your depreciation expense every year. So, that's how you compute your depreciation. Okay, so we have here an illustration. So, the company purchased a building worth 1,200,000, and the estimated useful life is 25 years. And it is estimated that the building can be sold for 20 years after. Okay, so I made some correction in the problem. So we have here again, the company purchased a building worth 1.2 million. The estimated useful life is 20 years, and it is estimated that the building can be sold for $200,000 after 20 years. So your cost is 1.2 million. Your salvage value is 200,000. So ibig sabihin, our depreciable cost is 1 million. Okay, let me show you that computation. Okay, so this is the computation. So your salvage value is 200,000, then depreciable amount or cost is 1 million. So after this, you just divide it by the estimated useful life, which is 20 years. So ibig sabihin, every year, yung depreciation expense niya ay 50,000. So this is the journal entry, no, to record depreciation. So the pro forma entry is actually a debit to the depreciation expense and a credit to accumulated depreciation. Depreciation expense is an expense account, whereas accumulated depreciation account is a contra asset account. So it will be shown as a deduction to your cost. Okay? So this is the table or depreciation table. So you'll start with year 1 no, until year 20. So your carrying amount or depreciation is 50,000. Your depreciation no, is 50,000 in year 1. So of course, the accumulated depreciation is also 50,000 kasi 1 year pa man lang. So the accumulated depreciation is 50,000. Now, how do we compute for carrying amount? So carrying amount is computed as 1.2 million. Dapat itong 1.2 nandito. So yung 1.2 million mo, magdededuct ka ng 50,000. So ibig sabihin your carrying amount is 1,150,000 at the end of year 1. By year 2, again, you will be recognizing another depreciation. So this time, your 50,000 accumulated depreciation becomes 100,000. So your carrying amount then is 1.1 million. So that's 1.2 million minus 100,000. So that's 1.1 million. Now, on the third year, ganun pa rin. Your depreciation is 50,000. Your accumulated depreciation is 150. That's 50,000 plus 100 here. So that's 150,000. And then, your carrying amount is computed as 1.2 million minus 150,000. And so on and so forth. So, until in year 20, take note, no? Ganun pa rin yung nangyari, no? Magde-depreciate siya ng 50,000. Tapos, yung accumulated depreciation natin ay magiging 1 million na. Equivalent na to your depreciable amount. So, 1.2, your carrying amount minus the accumulated depreciation. So, you'll have your carrying amount of 200,000, which is equivalent to your salvage value. Okay? So, let us now proceed to the next type of deferral. So we have pre-collection. So this pre-collection or advanced collection from customers. So customers paid already but goods or services have not yet been rendered. So again, ito yung ating mga nakolekta in advance from the customers pero hindi pa natin na-deliver yung goods or na-perform ang service. So there are also two methods of recording your pre-collection. So you can record it using the liability method or the income method. So ano ba yung kaibahan ng dalawa? So under the liability method, kaya liability ang tinawag or liability method ang tawag sa kanya because during the original entry or original transaction, the entry or the pre-collection o yung advance collection natin ay credit natin sa liability account. So usually you use unearned service income or unearned income. Okay? So, that's the reason. Now, pagdating ng adjusting entry, so since yung original entry natin dito ay nag-credit tayo ng liability, so kapag tayo ay nag-compute or naggawa ng adjusting entry class, dapat dito yung ating hahanapin is yung income. So, ibig sabihin, how much ba of the amount has been earned already. So, that's why ang adjusting entry natin dito ay nag-debit tayo ng liability and nag-credit tayo ng income. Okay, so that is liability method. Pag income method naman, ito, yung original entry mo, debit tayo ng cash, credit tayo ng income. So, we are crediting an income account here. So, pagdating ng adjusting entry, since nag-recognize ka ng income initially, so ang hahanapin mo is magkano yung liability. So, you'll be looking for the unearned portion naman. No, unearned income yung ating hahanapin, Kasi nga, nag-recognize tayo initially ng income. So, pag mag-adjust tayo, hanapin natin yung liability or yung unearned pa na portion of your income. So, this is an example of a pre-collection, so specifically unearned revenue. So, on January 2, 2020, the company received $16,000 for 4-month subscription of services. So, what is the adjusting journal entry should be made at the end of January 31, 2020. Okay. So, under the liability method, so this is how you're going to record your unearned service income under the liability method. So, under the liability method, debit siya ng cash, credit siya ng unearned service income of 16,000. Pagdating ng adjusting entry, hahanapin na nila, magkano ba ang income na? So, since liability yung entry natin dito, pagdating natin ng adjusting entry, hanapin natin magkano bang income, magkano ba sa portion na yun ang considered as earned already. So, that's 16,000 times 1 over 4 equals 4,000. So, that's the end portion. So, yun yung ating i-report as income. Now, for income method naman, kaya ang tawag sa kanya income method kasi pag recognize niya originally, credit niya ito sa income account. So, debit siya ng cash, 16,000, credit siya ng service income na 16,000. So that kapag siya ay gagawa na ng adjusting entry, ang hahanapin naman niya ay yung liability or yung unearned portion. So that is why here, nag-record tayo ng service income debit 12,000, credit unearned service income of 12,000. So again, 12,000 represents the unearned portion of your pre-collection or your advanced collection. Okay. So, we are now in the accruals naman. So, we're done with the deferrals. So, next we have this accruals. So, ano naman yung accruals? So, accruals is the postponement of recognition of an expense that are already incurred but not yet paid, or a revenue earned but still uncollected. So, ito baliktad naman. Kung kanina nag-advance kang bayad or nag-advance kang kolekta. So, dito naman, nagamit mo na yung expense, na-incur mo na, pero hindi mo pa siya binayaran. Or, yung revenue earned mo na, but hindi mo pa siya nakolekta. So, that's accrual. So, this adjustment considers the amount that are still unrecorded in any account. So, hindi pa siya na-record. So, the entry of this adjustment includes the increase in both balance sheet account and income statement accounts. So, accrual adjusting entries are needed in the following situation. So, first, to reflect expenses incurred during the accounting period that are unpaid and unrecorded by accruing the expense. Second, to reflect revenues earned during the accounting period that are uncollected and unrecorded by accruing revenue. So, basically, dalawa, no? Merong accrued expense at saka merong accrued income. So, these are the types of accrual. Una, accrued expense. Second, accrued income. And yung special, no, na accrual of uncollectible accounts. Okay, so let's start with the accrued expense. So, here, ano ba yung accrued expenses? So, these are incurred during the period but still unrecorded and unpaid until the end of the period. Thus, adjusting entries are needed to recognize this expense in the financial statement. So, what is the pro forma entry? So, very simple, no? Kapag accrued expense yan, so magde-debit ka na ng expense account, mag-credit ka ng liability account. So, let's take a specific example. So, here, no, accrued expense, specifically salaries. So, ito yung transaction natin. So, the company paid salaries every Saturday of the week. Then, the employee is paid a rate of 350 pesos per day. And suppose that January 31 is Thursday, what is the adjusting entry to be recorded at January 31, 2020? So, if this is the case, then, no, the next sweldo nila ay sa Sabado pa. So, meaning that's after January 31, 2020. So, what we're going to do now is we have to accrue that portion na nag-accrue na pero hindi pa nabayaran kasi nga by Saturday pa mababayaran. So, if January 31 is Thursday, so ibig sabihin, no, the employee has already worked na for 4 days. So, ibig sabihin from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So, that's a total of 1,400. Good for 350 pesos per day. No? Now, for 4 days. Okay? So, yung entry natin, debit salaries expense, of course, an expense account, and credit accrued salaries expense, which is a liability account. So, the amount is 1,400 pesos. Okay? So, another example is yung interest. Okay, so, ito naman, interest, no? So, the company acquired a loan from a bank with 14% interest worth 250,000 on January 1, 2020. So, what is the adjusting entry to recognize interest expense on January 31, 2020? Okay. So, ang entry niya, noong nangutang siya, nag-debit lang siya ng cash, 250,000, credit ng loans payable at 250,000. Now, punta tayo sa adjusting entry. Kasi because of the passage of time, of course, you will accrue interest. No? So, in this case, you have 1 month na interest. So, you have 250,000 times 14% times 1 month over 12, of course. So, the interest expense is 2,917 pesos. And then your credit accrued interest expense or payable. So, that's 2,917 pesos. So, just take note, no, that whatever or the amount or the rate, no, the interest rate, which is usually given in problems like this, are on an annual basis. No? So, para yan sa isang taon. So, that is why we are dividing, no, the amount here by 12 kasi we consider it as annual, no? Yung annual yung rate na ating 14%. So, another example is yung utilities, no? Accrued utilities. So, the company receives the bill of electricity worth 7,150 that are still unpaid and unrecorded on January 31, 2020. So, with that, no, kasi this is just a simple recognition of an expense and a liability. So, you just debit utilities expense, 7,950, credit accrued utilities expense, or accrued utilities payable, 7,950. Next, tapos na tayo sa accrued expenses. So, let's proceed to accrued revenue. So, ito naman, these are income that are earned but still unpaid by the customers and not yet recorded in the books of the company. So, na-earn na kasi na-deliver ng goods or na-perform ng service kasi lang hindi pa nagbayad yung customer mo. So, ito yung pro forma adjusting entry, no? So, magde-debit tayo ng asset, usually a receivable, and magka-credit tayo ng income. So, this is an example. The company renders service on 3 o'clock p.m. of January 31, 2020 worth 6,000 pesos but still unpaid no until February 6, 2020. So, kung ang question ay no, ano yung entry niya, ano adjusting entry na sa January 31, so ito yung answer natin. So, magde-debit tayo ng accounts receivable, 7,950. Credit tayo ng service income of course 7,950. So, that's accrued revenue. Okay? So, let us proceed to accrual of uncollectible accounts. Okay. For this, ano ba yung uncollectible accounts? So, uncollectible accounts is an estimation of the uncollectible amount out from the total credit sales or receivables of the company. This may be estimated for the percentage of sales and sometimes it is based on the total sales. So, this particular item here, this means that related siya sa accounts receivable, related siya sa mga collectibles ng company. So, dito, no, hindi pa man lumayas yung may pagkakautang sa atin, we are already anticipating na for probable losses associated with collectibles or mga receivables. Okay? So, there are bases no, or there are also different ways of computing or estimating the uncollectible accounts. So, dito, or we'll just learn that in your higher accounting. So, dito, uncollectible accounts may be based on sales, no? Or pwedeng percentage of sales or pwedeng total sales. So, pwede rin naman na based siya sa outstanding accounts receivable. So, depende yan sa policy ng company. And kung problem, of course, depende siya sa problem. Okay, so here's an example no, of an accrual of uncollectible accounts. So here, the company assumes that the estimated average of 1% of the total sales are uncollectible. So the company has earned 230,000 credit sales for the month of January 2020. So the adjusting entry to record uncollectible accounts, so ito na, debit tayo ng uncollectible accounts expense, credit ng allowance for uncollectible accounts. Bakit 2,300? Kasi that is 230,000 times 1%. Okay, so that's 2,300. So take note class, uncollectible accounts expense is an expense account, whereas allowance for uncollectible accounts is a contra asset account. So this allowance for uncollectible accounts will be deducted no, from the receivable in order to get the net realizable value of the receivable. So if 500 pesos of the recognized allowance are definitely uncollectible, so meaning you've already proven that itong 500 na to hindi na talaga makakolekta. So you have to write it off. So magra-write off tayo. So how do you write off? Ito, debit allowance for uncollectible accounts and credit accounts receivable for 500,000. So, itong uncollectible accounts expense, no? Pwede rin siyang bad debts. Pwedeng bad debts expense, then credit niya ay allowance for bad debts. Pwede namang doubtful accounts expense, and then yung credit niya ay allowance for doubtful expense or allowance for doubtful accounts. So, tapos na tayo mag-discuss lahat ng types of adjusting entries or adjustments. So, let us now discuss ano bang effect no, kapag na-omit ang adjusting entry. So, what if hindi ka nakapag-adjust na at the end of the accounting period? So when a company failed to include the proper adjusting entry for the transactions that occurred during the period, it will result to inaccurate information that are reflected to the financial position and financial performance of the entity. So isa-isahin natin, no? If that's a deferral of asset and they omitted, hindi siya nakapag-adjust, this will be the effect, no? So if you're using asset method, this will result to an overstatement of an asset and income as it understates the expenses. So here, you will be, kung hindi ka nakapag-adjust, you'll be overstating your asset and you're also overstating your income kasi you're understating your expense. By expense method naman, failure to adjust this original entry will result to an understatement of assets and income as it overstates naman expenses. So, baliktad, Kasi diba initially recognize it at expense. So, ibig sabihin, pag hindi ka nakapag-adjust at the end of the accounting period, you will be reporting expenses na malaki. So, therefore, you'll be understating your income and also your asset because pag hindi ka nakapag-adjust, meaning you will not be able to recognize the asset portion of your of the amount that you have reported initially as expense. So that's the effect kapag deferral ng asset. What about deferral of revenue? So ito naman yung mga advance collection. So what's the effect kapag na-omit natin? So if you're using liability method, the failure to record the adjusting entry will result to an understatement of income as it understates the revenue and overstatement of liabilities. So that's the effect kapag liability method, pag hindi ka nakapag prepare ng adjusting entry at the end of the accounting period. For income method, ang effect niya ay makaka-understate siya ng liability and maka-overstate ng income kasi nga ino-overstate din niya ang revenue. So that's the effect kapag deferral ng revenue under income method. Okay? So what about accrual of revenue? So, pag hindi tayo nakapag-accrue ng income or revenue, what is the effect? So, this will result to an understatement of net income as it fails to recognize revenue. So, kulang yung ating i-report na income kasi nga, hindi mo na-recognize yung accrued revenue. So, another is accrual of expense. So, pag ito naman hindi mo na-record, so, the effect is that it will result to an overstatement of income as it understates the expenses. So, what about this one? So, failure to record depreciation and uncollectible accounts at the end of the period will result to an overstatement of assets and income as it fails to recognize expense account. So, yun yung mga epekto sa ating financial statements kung kapag hindi tayo nakapag adjusting entry, hindi tayo nakapagpagawa ng adjusting entries. Okay? So, I hope you find this discussion video helpful. So, if you have questions regarding the topic, feel free to ask during our Zoom meeting. So, thank you and see you again in the next video. Bye!